a team that is well known to be a skid mark on your underwear and on the toilet seat, and that is, of course, the Cleveland Browns. Of course, we like to call them here on Very Cold Lasagna, and well known worldwide as the Skidmarks, the Cleveland Skidmarks. And well, why were they the Cleveland Skidmarks yet again in 2022? Well, for the Cleveland Browns, the Browns 2022 offseason was very notable, but for all the typical Skidmarks reasons. Owner Jimmy Haslam and general manager Andrew Berry were stupid enough at the time last offseason to overpay the Houston Texans up the ass and trade up for their quarterback at the time, Deshaun Watson, for a shit ton of draft picks, which honestly the Browns could have done a couple of years ago in the 2017 NFL draft with, well, the number 1 overall pick and get Deshaun Watson. But no, instead, they have to pay a shit ton of draft picks to go and get Deshaun Watson, including 3 first and third round draft picks, despite the uncertainty of his then ongoing sexual assault allegations and lawsuits. And I think there's still 2 that are still going on at this time. But most of the allegations and lawsuits were settled at the time. The NFL suspended Watson 11 games, leaving head coach Kevin Stefanski to make a game plan for backup Jacoby Brissett in the interim. And I predicted that if the NFL would suspend Deshaun Watson, at least for a good chunk of the season, then the Skidmarks were going to be competing for his playoff spot, not by a long shot. But instead, the Browns were expected to rather evaluate talent until Deshaun Watson came back. So when you look at this season, at least a little bit of fairness, yeah, the Browns were not going to be that good. But they also weren't that bad either. They also weren't really that terrible. They weren't really that typical Skidmarksy in fairness. Yes, as expected, the offense was very run-centric. Nick Chubb was the Thomas the Tank engine to assure that Jacoby Brissett wouldn't have to shoulder too much. And in fairness to Jacoby Brissett, he actually did very solid in managing the offense. But, as seen for much of his career, he has his limitations. And even though the offense did okay at times, their defense had a lot of problems. They couldn't stop the run. Their corners were pretty bad. The secondary didn't know where the receivers were a lot of the times. As such, they lost a good amount of winnable games to start the season against the Jets, the Chargers, and the Ravens. A lot of blown opportunities to win it. It didn't help matters when you lose your linebacker, Anthony Walker Jr., early in the season to a season-ending injury, which weakened both the pass rush and the passing defense. So overall, yeah, the Browns, they weren't that great before Deshaun Watson came back, and it wasn't great when he came back either. So I guess on a positive note, before we get into Deshaun Watson, Brissett, yes, he went 4-7 as a starter, but, he ended that period on a high note. He led the Browns to a comeback win against Tom Brady and the Bucs at home in his last start in Week 12. So, I guess that's good. I guess that's kind of good for Jacoby Brissett, to go out on that kind of note before the expected came. That time came for Deshaun Watson's debut in Week 13, and of all places, Houston. He got that hostile ovation from whatever was left of the Texans fan base. And, from that point onward, it was all about how Deshaun Watson was going to look, how Deshaun Watson was going to play the rest of the way. As expected, he looked rusty because he hadn't played in almost 2 years, as he was underthrowing and overthrowing receivers, not recognizing pressure that Houston didn't have. They won the game, but again, looked pretty rusty. But in Cleveland's final 5 games, he showed a little bit of flashes of his past self, but it was pretty evident that he looked really rough. 5 games was not going to be enough to establish a rhythm, shake off such rust. And as expected, the Browns were eliminated from playoff contention in Week 16 and ended the season at 7-10. So, obviously, the skid marks weren't going to go anywhere. But, in fairness, they weren't that terrible. but again, not that great either. They're pretty mediocre. So the season finale in Pittsburgh also saw a culmination of the defense's season-long collapse beyond the already mentioned on-field issues. For the most part, I guess you could say, in short, they were lacking the discipline. Like players like Perrion Winfrey, Jadeveon Clowney, and even Myles Garrett. They were lacking the discipline. They either got benched, they didn't start games, or in the case of Jadeveon Clowney in the season finale, they were sent home. So head coach Kevin Stefanski made the choice to fire defensive coordinator Joe Woods and replace him with former Lions head coach Jim Schwartz. So I don't know how that's going to pan out, but hey, you never know. So yeah, the skid marks still remain the skid marks, as if they weren't already skid marksy enough. So they're the skid marks that we all know and love again. But obviously, the main focus for them now is to hope that Deshaun Watson will have a full offseason to prepare. I mean, like I said, he still has like at least 2 sexual assault cases that he has to deal with. But they'll have to regroup and hope to attain better discipline and hope that Deshaun Watson will be ready to go with the full offseason for 2023. So for the Browns, they don't really have a lot of cap space to work with. At the time I'm recording this podcast, they were in the red. I'm not sure if they got under that, but not a lot of cap space to work with. They also don't have a first round pick. So not good for them either. So that it may work this year, but over time it's going to start biting you in the ass. Looking at some of their key free agents, you have defensive end Jadeveon Clowney, strong safety Ronnie Harrison, linebacker Anthony Walker, corner Greedy Williams, and running backs Kareem Hunt and Dearness Johnson. So a lot of your starting defense going to free agency, unless if the Browns can restructure or make some other players cap casualties, then a lot of these players are going to be gone. I imagine Jadeveon Clowney is not coming back to the skid marks. Some of the things that they have to address in free agency, obviously the interior defensive line needs work. They couldn't stop the run. They couldn't generate pressure inside, especially when Myles Garrett needed a shit ton of help. So they have to invest on not just the interior defensive line, but also on the opposite side of Myles Garrett, because just like with Aaron Donald and other players that are like star defensive pass rushers, like they can't do it alone. They need a supporting cast. So Myles Garrett could definitely use someone opposite of him, like on the other side, in order for the defensive line to really generate some heat on opposing quarterbacks. And, you know, they can definitely stand to get some receiving help behind Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones, because, yeah, David Njoku was okay, but tight end, but it's like you don't really have that other third option to go to in the event that Cooper and Peoples-Jones are not doing well, and you need the third option to step up, especially considering that, you know, you want to know what you have in Deshaun Watson, like how he'll do in his like first full year as a starter. So for the Browns, yes, they were the skid marks that we all know and love again in 2022. But in fairness, they were pretty mediocre. Like, it's not really they were the skid marks that we all know to love because they lost so much. They were losing that many games in blowout fashion. Like, they suck to suck. I mean, not really this year. But they were the skid marks because they made a stupid decision to go get Deshaun Watson when he was in the midst of, you know, these legal cases, and they made a stupid decision to go get him for a lot of picks when they had him available at the number 1 pick in 2017. That's why. And also, it's Cleveland. So for the Browns, it's going to be very important that Deshaun Watson can at least show some like return to form this offseason in the offseason program in training camp. and going into the regular season. If he doesn't, it's going to be very concerning, especially since they gave him a big fat contract. And if he doesn't show any sign of his prime days, or when he was doing really good with a crappy Houston Texans team, then it's going to be serious trouble for the Skidmarks. That's going to be looking at that toilet seat saying, what is the shit that we just picked up in the 2022 offseason? Like, shit. Literally.